please hit that subscribe button. Hey everybody, better suited to win the Stanley Cup this season. If you are new to the channel, the Washington Capitals, the Boston Bruins.
Locked on and he scored! And we're live. Hey everybody, so today I want to do something a little bit different, something I've never done before, and it's play a little game called Ceiling versus Floor. And basically what this is I'm going to look at players, and for this video the top 10 picks in this past 2020 NHL Draft, and talk about what I think realistically their ceiling is in the NHL and realistically what their floor is if things don't go all that well for them in the NHL. I want to say I saw right after the draft, I forget who it was, but someone was doing this on Twitter, and I thought it was a really, really good idea and a really interesting thing to look at. Like, how good can this player be, and what happens if they don't really fulfill their potential at the NHL? How far could they drop down? So I don't remember who it was that did it on Twitter, but that's where I did get this idea from. But this should be really, really fun to look at. Obviously, if any of these guys come out to be complete draft busts, then their floor is, you know, Nail Yakupov level of just being out of the league within a few years. But I'm not going to put any in that category. I want to realistically look at each player, what they bring to the table, and where they realistically probably would top out and where they realistically probably would bottom out if you know, they're an NHL level player but not exactly worthy of being a top 10 pick. So we're going to be doing this for all 10 picks from the 2020, or the first 10 picks in the 2020 draft, starting at number 1 with Alexis Lafreniere. So Alexis Lafreniere went 1 overall to the New York Rangers. He's a left winger, and for his ceiling, I think he can be an elite top-line winger in the NHL, scoring 80 to 90 plus points per season in the league in his prime. A very Mikko Rantanen-esque type player, big body, good skating, and ability to produce offensively, both with goal scoring and with playmaking ability. So Lafreniere went number 1 overall for a reason, and I think he has a chance to be a big-time elite player in the NHL who puts up a lot of points. Floor. So let's say things don't go so well for Lafreniere and he doesn't become the Mikko Rantanen type player. I still think at the very least he's going to be a second-line winger. Worst comes to worst, the Rangers got themselves a second-line winger in Alexis Lafreniere, someone who's probably going to give you 50 to 60-ish points a season. And the way I put it for a comparison would be a playmaking Chris Kreider. Now, Chris Kreider's more of a goal scorer and not so much on the in the assist column as much, but Lafreniere is going to be less of a goal scorer and more of an assist man, I think. But he would be like a playmaking version of Chris Kreider, a second-line winger who still brings good value to you, but maybe not necessarily what you were hoping for with a first overall pick. But I don't think Lafreniere is ever just going to completely flame out and be, you know, a terrible NHL player. I think you've got at least a second-line winger in him with the ability to potentially become an elite scoring winger in the league like Mikko Rantanen. Number 2, Quinton Byfield, center, went to the LA Kings, 2nd overall. His ceiling is for him to be a franchise center. And 80 to 90 plus points a season, ability to score as well as pass, very Evgeny Malkin-like player, big body, size, speed, skill, the whole package. And if things go really, really well for Byfield, he has the chance to be Andrei Kopitar's replacement and a very Evgeny Malkin-like player in the NHL. And I think that's what the Kings are certainly hoping for when they drafted him 2nd overall. But what's the floor for Byfield? Let's say things don't go so well. I still think he can be a solid top 6 scoring center, maybe better suited for the second line, a 50 to 60 point guy, very Sean Monahan-esque. I think Monahan had that one big season in Calgary where he had 80 plus points. But other than that, he's been right around 60 points for most of his career. I think he'd be better suited as a number 2 than a number 1. And I think Byfield at the bottom could end up like that, maybe better suited as a second line center and only 50 to 60-ish points a season. Maybe not ever reaching the full potential of being the Evgeny Malkin type player that some people think he certainly could become. So again, I don't think he's ever going to be a complete draft bust or anything like that. But I think, there is a possibility that maybe he only ever becomes a second-line centerman and not a first-line guy. Number 3, Tim Stützle went to the Ottawa Senators. He can play left wing or center. I'm really not sure where he's going to play at the NHL level. But whether he plays in the middle or whether he plays on the wing, I think he is going to be he has the potential, a ceiling of being an elite top line forward, whether that's down the middle or on the wing. A greater than point per game player, very Mitch Marner-esque. Marner had 94 points a couple years ago. I think he has a chance to be a very Mitch Marner-esque type player. He's definitely a playmaker more so than a goal scorer. I think throughout his career he's going to have a lot more assists than he does goals, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. Nikita Kucherov is that way. Mitch Marner is that way. There's Johnny Gaudreau is that way. There's some great players that play the wing and are still like that. I think Stützle has a chance to become an elite top-line forward and really be a superstar player for the Ottawa Senators. What's the floor for Stützle? Again, this is a guy that I don't see things going really, really bad for. I think at worst, he ends up being a second-line setup man, somebody very similar to a Josh Bailey type with the New York Islanders. Remember, Bailey went 9th overall in his draft year, which I believe was 2008, if I'm not mistaken. Around 50 points a season, 50-ish points per year. Setup man, lots of assists, maybe 15 to 20 goals and the rest all assists. I think that's worst case scenario for Tim Stützle. I think he's going to be a lot better than that, but I think that would be the floor for him, would be kind of a second line Josh Bailey type player. Moving on to number 4, Lucas Raymond, who went 4th overall to the Detroit Red Wings. He is a winger, and I think he has the ceiling of being a high-end first-line winger in the NHL, up to possibly 80 points a season or somewhere around there. Very Johnny Gaudreau-esque. He has the ability to score and set up. I think he's a little bit better of a setup person, but he can score as well. Great with the puck on his stick. Very good skater. I see a lot of the qualities I see in Johnny Gaudreau in a guy like Lucas Raymond, another guy who's smaller in stature. And, I think the potential is there in Detroit for him to be a legitimate top-line left winger who pushes a point per game and has some really, really good seasons. What's the floor for Raymond if things don't go well? Well, at the very least, you're getting a solid two-way player. He's good in the defensive zone, and he plays full 200 feet. I think at worst, he would be a mid-lineup winger, second or third line, 40 to 50 points per season at the absolute worst. Think Washington Capitals era Marcus Johansson. Now, Johansson's really declined over the last few seasons, but if you go back to when he was in Washington, and especially his last couple years in Washington, he was getting around 50 points per season playing on their second line left wing. And he was a really solid middle-of-the-lineup type player for them. And I think that would be the floor for Lucas Raymond. Maybe not living up to being a top 5 draft pick, but still a more than serviceable player, a good player in the middle of your lineup who can still certainly contribute and will play a full 200-foot game up and down the ice. Pick number 5 went to the Ottawa Senators as well. And with this pick, they took defenseman Jake Sanderson. And everyone was surprised when they took Jake Sanderson over Jamie Drysdale, because Drysdale was the definitive top-ranked defenseman heading into this draft. But they decided to go with Sanderson, who's much more of a two-way player. And I think the ceiling is there for Jake Sanderson to be a top-pair two-way defenseman, a franchise cornerstone defenseman, very similar to Ryan Suter in Minnesota. One of those guys who just is a shutdown D-man in the defensive zone, but also can put up points, can give you 40-plus, 50-plus points a season. Contribute at both ends of the ice, play in all situations, power play, penalty kill, 5-on-5, 4-on-4, everything. I think Jake Sanderson has the chance to be a tremendous all-around defenseman in the NHL and a franchise cornerstone on that D-core for the Ottawa Senators. And what's the floor for Sanderson? Well, I don't think he's ever going to turn out really, really bad. I think he was picked in the top 5 for a reason, and he's a very good player. I think at worst, Sanderson could be a solid middle pair D-man, a two-way guy, very Jake Muzzin-like. You think of Jake Muzzin last couple years in Toronto, LA before that. Really good middle pair defenseman. Not going to blow you away with offensive stats, you know, maybe 25, 30-ish points, maybe hits 40 every once in a while, but not going to, just really solid two-way play. And someone who at least is going to take care of his own zone. And I think if the offense never comes for Jake Sanderson, he's still going to be a guy who takes care of his own zone. And I don't think he's ever going to be a complete flop of a draft pick. He should at least be a solid 3-4 type guy at the very, very worst. Pick number 6, Jamie Drysdale, the other defenseman who went in the top 10, went to the Anaheim Ducks at 6 overall, and he has a very, very high ceiling. He was supposed to be the first defenseman taken in this draft. He wasn't, but he has the potential to be a franchise-changing offensive defenseman, a Norris Trophy candidate, a very Cale Makar-type player. The offense is absolutely there with Drysdale. He has the potential to put up big-time points. You know, he's been compared a lot to Cale Makar. I don't know if he's going to be at that level, but if he is, boy, Anaheim got an absolute steal at number 6 if he is. He has the potential to be an elite offensive defenseman in the NHL. What's the floor, though, for Jamie Drysdale? If things don't go great at the NHL level, I think he's still going to be a good point producer from the back end, but probably if he doesn't round out his game, there will be defensive deficiencies there. And a player that came to mind is Shane Gostisbehere in Philadelphia, very Shane Gostisbehere-esque. I think Drysdale's going to end up being much better than Gostisbehere did, but that's a player that came to mind for me, was just someone who has the ability to put up points and bring a lot of offense from the back end, but does have those defensive deficiencies in his game. And I think that would be the absolute worst for Jamie Drysdale, but I do think he's more likely to become that Cale Makar type player, maybe a Quinn Hughes type player who puts up a lot of points and is able to just be an all-around great top pair defenseman, and that's probably what Drysdale is going to become. Alexander Holtz, number 7, scoring winger, one of the best, probably the best pure sniper available in this draft. He went to the New Jersey Devils at number 7, and his ceiling is an elite top-line goal scorer in the NHL. We're talking 40-plus goals per season. Very, David Pastrnak-like, maybe Patrik Laine-esque, what Patrik Laine is supposed to be. Laine has had a little drop-off in his goal scoring the past couple of years, but I think Alexander Holtz has a chance to become what Patrik Laine was in his 44-goal season and what Patrik Laine was supposed to be at the NHL level. Just that elite 40-plus goal scorer, pure sniper, really, really elite goal scorer at the NHL level, and a guy who will be in the running for Rocket Richard trophies as the league-leading goal scorer. I think the ceiling is there for Holtz to really be one of those top guys when it comes to putting the puck in the net. What's the floor, though, for Alexander Holtz? Well, the thing about these snipers and these pure goal scorers is sometimes the goal scoring translates really well to the NHL, and sometimes it doesn't. And if it doesn't, it can be a big, big problem, because these kind of players a lot of times don't have a great all-around game, and they kind of rely heavily on their shot and their goal scoring ability. And if that doesn't come through, then they're really in trouble. But Holtz does have a decent all-around game, especially for his age, so I don't think that's going to be a huge problem for him, more so for the next guy we're going to talk about. But I think worst comes to worst, Alexander Holtz is a mid-lineup goal scorer, second or third line guy. I think he would be rather one-dimensional. The chances there, at least, for him to end up being a one-dimensional player who pretty much just shoots and that's it. Kind of almost Frank Vatrano-like when you think about the Florida Panthers. Vatrano's kind of like that. He has his shot, but what else? Another guy, sticking with the Patrik Laine comparison, 2018-19 Patrik Laine. That was Laine's worst season. He had a really down year in 2018-19. And, kind of that second, third line guy who is going to score goals and put the puck in the net. But what else is he going to bring to the table if he doesn't round his game out and become a great all-around player. But again, that's the absolute floor for Holtz. I think he's more likely to become a 40-goal guy and be a high-level goal scorer in the NHL. That brings us to pick number 8, where right wing Jack Quinn went to the Buffalo Sabres, and this was, I think, probably the riskiest pick of the top 10, and probably the most boom or bust out of any of these guys. The ceiling for Jack Quinn is very, very high. He showed that he can put the puck in the net. I think he can be a very consistent top 6 scoring winger, 30-plus goals year in and year out. Very Max Pacioretty-esque. Someone who's going to probably give you 30-plus year in and year out if they're healthy. 60, 70 points. And really be a great goal scorer that can bring a lot to the table and score a lot for a team in Buffalo that certainly needs that. But the floor here for Jack Quinn, I think, is a little bit lower than what some of these other players have. And I think there's a chance where he could only end up being kind of a third-line secondary scorer. That may end up being kind of inconsistent, but shows potential, but can't put it all together. And a player that came to mind was Brett Connolly for me. Connolly was picked 6th overall in the 2010 NHL Draft, I believe, and he's never really put it all together. He's had some decent seasons. He had a 20-goal season with Washington. He had, I believe, 19 goals last year with Florida. So he's made himself still a solid NHLer, but he's basically a third-line winger. And I think that would be the floor for Jack Quinn, would be a Brett Connolly-type third-line winger who scores goals but doesn't really, never put it all together to be an elite top 6 guy. But again, we'll see. I mean, we don't know what the future holds for any of these guys, but I think that would be the floor for Quinn, and the ceiling would be a Max Pacioretty type, like 30-plus goals year in and year out, and a really good top-line goal scorer. Pick number 9 was Marco Rossi, center going to the Minnesota Wild, who desperately needed a center. And Marco Rossi, I think, has a chance to potentially be the biggest steal of this draft, dropping all the way to number 9. I think the possibility is there for him to be the 3rd or 4th best player to come out of this entire draft. The ceiling for Rossi is a franchise center, a elite 80 to 90 plus points year in and year out, elite top-line center in the NHL. Think of a better version of Matt Barzal. And Matt Barzal is really, really good. This is not a knock against Matt Barzal, but I think Rossi has a chance to be an even better version of Matt Barzal, and someone who puts up more points than Barzal, but with a similar play style, a setup man through and through. He is going to have a ton of assists. Not really sure what is in store for him goal scoring wise at the NHL level, but there is no doubt he is going to have a ton of assists, and great setup man, and I think he has a chance to be a star player for the Minnesota Wild for years to come. The floor for Marco Rossi, I think at the very least he'll be a mid-lineup center. Second line, most likely, 40 to 50 plus points a season. Very Nick Schmaltz-like. Nick Schmaltz in Arizona had, I believe, 45 points last season. I think worst comes to worst, maybe size does become an issue for Rossi, although I don't think it's going to. Again, Rossi's a guy I'm very, very high on, and I see him ending up much more at his ceiling than at his floor. But I think the absolute worst that could happen would be he'd be probably like a second-line center, scoring around 50 points a year, and very Nick Schmaltz-like in Arizona. But again, I see him being much closer to his ceiling. And finally, that brings us to pick number 10, Cole Perfetti, a guy who can play wing or center, much like Tim Stützle. Went to the Winnipeg Jets, 10th overall. And again, I'm not sure if he's going to play down the middle or on the wing in the NHL. I would lean towards winger with Perfetti. I think he's probably going to be a winger more than a center. But again, that's up to Winnipeg and what they want to do with him. His ceiling, I think he is a legitimate top 6 scorer in the NHL, around 70 points a season or so. Think of Teuvo Teravainen in Carolina. I think he has the chance to become a very Teuvo Teravainen type player, somebody who can score goals as well as assist from the wing, makes everyone around him better, very good with the puck, good skater. I think Perfetti has a chance to literally be a top-line forward who can put up 70-plus points in a season and you know, be a great player for Winnipeg. For the floor for Perfetti, I think at worst comes to worst, he's a mid-lineup forward scoring around 40 points a season. A lot like what Jonathan Drouin has become. Now, Jonathan Drouin was taken, I believe, 3rd overall in his draft year and has certainly not lived up to that, but is still a decent NHL player and still puts up points for the Montreal Canadiens. So a kind of a Jonathan Drouin-esque type player who, you know, 40 to 50 points a year, 2nd or 3rd line on most teams, 2nd on a lot of teams, 3rd on maybe some of your deeper offensive teams. But you know, I think worst comes to worst, that's where Perfetti ends up. But again, he's another guy I think you're going to get a little more scoring than that, but that's just what I have for his floor. That would be if the absolute worst happened with Cole Perfetti. But that's what I've got, guys. So that was ceiling/floor for the top 10 picks in the 2020 NHL Draft. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Again, I think all of these guys have the potential to be really, really good players. They were taken in the top 10 for a reason. The potential is always there for one of them or a couple of them to end up being completely big busts and just not doing anything at the NHL level. But that would be, you know, really worst comes to worst. For the floors, I was just kind of going with, like, they're still good NHL players, but maybe they don't reach their full potential. Where are they likely to end up? And, you know, most of them are at least mid lineup players on your 2nd or 3rd line. So, that's going to do it for this video, guys. Thank you very much for watching. Like, comment, share, subscribe, follow on social media. All those links are down in the description. If you'd like to further support the channel, links to our Patreon, merchandise store, and donation link are down in the description as well. Keep spreading the word about this channel. Let's keep this thing growing. Thank you very much for watching. Hope you enjoyed this video, and I'll talk to you guys very, very soon.